I keep fighting voices in my mind that say I'm not enough. Every single lie that tells me I will never measure up. Am I more than just the sum of every high and every low? Remind me once again just who I am, because I need to know. Ooh, you say I am loved when I can't feel a thing, and you say I am strong when I think I am weak, and you say I am held when I am falling short, and when I don't belong, you say I am yours, and I believe what you say of me. I believe the only thing that matters now is everything you think of me. In you I find my worth, in you I find my identity. Ooh, you say I am loved when I can't feel a thing, and you say I am strong when I think I am weak, and you say I am held when I am falling short, and when I don't belong, you say I am yours, and I believe, oh, I believe what you say of me. I believe. Taking all I have and now I'm laying it at your feet. In you I found my worth, in you I find my identity. Ooh, you say I am loved when I can't feel a thing, and you say I am strong when I think I am weak, and you say I am held when I am falling short, and when I don't belong, you say I am yours, and I believe, oh, I believe what you say of me. I believe, and I believe, yes, I believe what you say of me. I believe.
Thank you, Grace Broski and Michelle Nunez. It was well done. Well, in my sermon last Sunday, I made a smart remark about a supermarket tabloid known as the National Enquirer. I didn't devote the sermon to it. It was just a comment that was uttered kind of in passing. Well, I couldn't help but think of the National Enquirer again this past week when I read the words of Jesus Christ that we just read moments ago from Luke chapter 21. Jesus said about what things will be like in the last days. You will hear of wars and insurrections. Over in Matthew it says you will hear of wars and rumors of war, but in Luke it's wars and insurrections. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes and in various places, famines and plagues. They will arrest you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. You will be betrayed, even by parents and brothers, by relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all because of my name. So yeah, I mean, that made me think about all those covers on the National Enquirer that I've seen over the years while standing in the checkout line. But it also made me think Reuters. It also made me think of the BBC, as well as various other major news outlets here in the United States, because a lot of what Jesus is describing in Luke chapter 21 seems to be the case of what's going on today. Now, just as a little side note, the things that he described, just kind of tucking back your minds to the year 70 AD, because a lot of this stuff did happen in 70 AD when the Romans ransacked the city of Jerusalem and they destroyed Solomon's temple. But biblical scholars have always kind of understood this passage to have a duality of meaning, referencing a prediction of what would happen in 70 AD, which was about 40 years after Jesus said these things, but it also has an end times, an eschatological bent to it, things that would precede the return of Christ. I'm going to ask all of you a question that really should get some interesting conversations started at coffee hour, and if you get into arguments about it, please don't drag me in the middle of it. But this ought to be fuel for conversation, and it's this. What do you think about the state of affairs in the world today? What do you think about the condition of the world? You know, often the news is quite bad. Today, we are closer to nuclear war than we have been at any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And we've had some close calls in between times, but arguably now we're closer than any point we have been since then. Incidentally, that took place exactly 60 years ago at this time, October, November 1962, when the Soviets were putting missiles aboard ships and they were hauling them to Cuba to set up missile bases there. And President Kennedy got on the phone with Khrushchev and told him, turn those ships around or we're going to sink them. And fortunately he did, and it was the world was really on the brink, and we're closer now than we have been since that time to something like that. Also, the entire continent of Europe is in danger of freezing to death this winter because of their longtime reliance on energy from Russia. Drought in many places, including Europe. I was over there this past summer and the drought was horrible. The corn was a foot high. Absolutely nothing. That's going to cause food prices to go up in many places. Did you know that the United States, our own country, is dangerously short on diesel fuel? We rely on diesel for a lot of things you don't even think of, and it has far-reaching ramifications for us. It's going to negatively affect a lot of things unless something is done about it. And violence and crime have been on the increase in many places throughout the Western Hemisphere. We often think of Chicago, but just Google Sweden and what goes on in Sweden. Sweden is almost like the Bronx, and you wouldn't think of that. Throughout the Western Hemisphere, a lot of bad stuff is going on. So, of all the news that you and I see, what percentage of it do you think is good? Not a lot of it seems to be. You will hear of wars and insurrections. There will be earthquakes and famines and plagues. You will be betrayed and handed over. Jesus said that in approximately the year 33 AD, because he said these words shortly before his passion. But it's now 2022 AD, or Common Era. And a lot of it seems to be what's going on now. Probably you've heard someone say, maybe you've uttered it yourself, wow, things are really getting bad. Well, for some perspective, things were also pretty bad 500 years ago. We didn't have nukes, but we had other stuff going on. Things were kind of bad then. Things were also bad 1,000 years ago. The truth of the matter is, ever since Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden, ever since that time, the world has always been a pretty scary place. It's just that sometimes we forget about it. Ever since Cain picked up a rock and used it to kill his brother Abel, we have been getting better and better, or I should say more proficient, at killing one another. Human societies and nations have always been violent and unjust. Unfortunately, it's in our DNA. But on the flip side of that, let's look at the other side of the coin, because I see some of you getting really depressed. Societies and nations have also been peaceful and productive, and at times, believe it or not, successful arbiters of equity. Human beings have also done a lot of good things in this world. We are members of the human race, and as such, we've always been this one great big dichotomy. Human beings are capable, oftentimes the same person, are capable of doing good as well as capable of doing evil, and throughout history we've done both. Martin Luther, the German Protestant reformer, he said that this applies to Christians as well. In fact, he describes Christians as being simultaneously saint and sinner. That's an interesting concept, but Luther said we are simultaneously saint and sinner. So how do you and I, the church, respond to this in the times that we're living in? In Luke chapter 21, Jesus says three things that indicate the type of response that you and I should take to this. Verse 9, he says, do not be terrified when you see these things taking place. That's the first thing he says. Do not be terrified. And right away you're thinking as a rational person, well, look, if I look out my front window and I see my neighbor's house on fire, it's going to scare me. Of course it is. But the terror that he's talking about is not the emotional response of fear, which is normal, and you're a candidate for the loony bin if you never feel it. He's talking about paralysis, the type of fear that keeps you from trying, in other words. He says, do not be terrified. That's verse 9. Verse 13, he says this will give you an opportunity to testify, which basically means evangelism, share the gospel. And there are multiple ways of doing it. You don't have to do it exactly like some churches do and stand on a street corner and hand out tracts. There's multiple ways of doing that, but essentially the church exists to tell the world that God exists, that God is alive, that there is a God in heaven who forgives sins on earth. And finally, he uses the word endurance. Verse 19, he says, by your endurance, you will gain your souls. So in a world like ours, this is the threefold response of you and me, the church. Do not be terrified to the point of paralysis. Tell others about the gospel. And finally, endure. stick with it. One of my favorite stories about the church comes from recent years, and this made the news sometime in the last 20 years. Down south, there was a Methodist church, and I don't even remember which state it was in, but they had an F4 tornado touch down, and it came roaring through town and just completely leveled the Methodist church. All that was left was a pile of 2x4s and some shingles scattered out on the lawn. You know what that congregation did? This happened like late in the week, probably on a Thursday or Friday. That coming Sunday, they showed up with their lawn chairs, and they had church right there on the slab. They didn't have a basement, it was a slab foundation. And they had worship right there on that slab where their building once stood. You see, they were bound and determined that they were going to continue to be the church. Come hell or high water, they were going to continue to be the church. That's what St. Paul is going to do as well. That's what you and I are going to continue to do as well. We're living in a proverbial tornado. We feel the wind and we see the debris of culture and society and nation and world. We see things being blown apart. But you and I are going to continue to meet here in the midst of that. And I don't care if everything is reduced to 2x4s and shingles. We're going to continue to meet here in the midst of that. Why? Because we're the church. Jesus said the gates of hell will not prevail against it. You know, just like everybody else in society, every single one of us, you and I carry with us a certain angst. We carry with us a certain feeling of aggravation. But remember this, you and I are not people of the National Enquirer. You and I are people of the good book, the Bible. The wars and insurrections will not deter us from practicing our faith, and neither will the dreadful portents and signs in the sky. For as Christ has promised, by your endurance you will gain your souls. Amen.